Welcome to Parsha with Rashi. 30 minutes on the Parsha with our friend for the year, Don Yitzchak Abravanel. This week's Parsha is Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor begins with many laws of the Kohanim, which we're not going to have time for. We're going to look at the second half of the Parsha, which deals with the Moadim. There's some other important subjects that are taken up as well, but that is the dominant feature of the second half of the Parsha, and that's what we're going to look at together. So let's get to it with if you're with me in the Stone Chumash, we are on page 684, where the Torah is talking about the Moadim, the festivals in the course of the year, in the cycle of the year. So actually, the Torah begins with Shabbos, and Abravanel has something to say about that, for which we don't have time. And then the first Moed, the first festival, the first subject in the cycle of the year is Pesach, which the Torah here deals with in brief. Abarbanel explains that the Chag HaPesach, obviously the narrative associated with Pesach, with the redemption from Egypt, the Exodus, and the bondage, is described in a lot of detail, but also the mitzvahs of Pesach described in Parshas Bo, in a lot of detail. So the Torah mentions it here only briefly. Then the Torah talks about Shavuos, but along the way we have quite an interesting and important passage about the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. Of course, that's the time interval in which we find ourselves right now. And for that reason, I like to take a close look at that. Actually, let's take a look at page 682 in the Art Scroll Chumash, or Perek Chav Gimel, chapter 23, verses 9 and 10. Initially, V'adiber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ki savo el haaretz asher ani nosein lachem. When you come to the land that I'm giving you, uksartim es kitsira, you shall harvest its yield. That refers specifically to grain, but generally to the harvest of the agricultural yield. V'heveisim es omer reishis kitzirchem el hakohen. You shall bring an omer. An omer is a measure of volume, but it refers specifically to a sheath of barley. And the Torah doesn't say explicitly that it's barley, but we know that's the bikurim. That is the first grain that ripens early in the season. A wheat harvest is a bit later. The barley harvest is the early harvest. So we will refer to that opening passage shortly. But for now, let's skip forward to a few more verses. Pasuk Tes Vav, verse 15. Usfartem lachem. So, the Torah indicates there's a mitzvah of bringing the Omer. Actually, my apologies. Let's continue to look at the first paragraph, continuing with Pasuk Yud Aleph, verse 11 on page 684. Ve'henifes ha'omer lifnei Hashem lirtzonechem. You shall wave the Omer, this measure of barley, lirtzonechem, like to evoke divine favor for you. Hashem should favor us. From the day after Shabbos, which the rabbis explain it means the day after Yom Tov of Pesach. Then the Torah says this is the offering of the Omer. It's just waving this measure of barley. The Torah doesn't say clearly what to do with it. But that's the mitzvah, and this is a mitzvah min HaTorah. The next mitzvah that the Torah takes up in Pasuk Tes Vav is Sfartem lachem, count, start to count. Mimacharas hashamas, miyom haviachem es omer hatirva, from the day that you brought that Omer, Sheva Shabbosos Yimos, then you count 7 complete weeks. Until after the 7 weeks have passed, you count 50 days. Now, actually, we count 49 days, but on the 50th day, we bring a new offering. Okay, I needed to review these psukim for the context in order to share with you a few questions and then the approach that Abravanel advances. Firstly, he asks, why does the Torah say Mimoshvo Seichem? In Pasuk Yud Zayin, it says, Mimoshvo Seichem taviu lechem tnufa. From your habitations, bring the bread which is waved. Now, Notice that the previous paragraph spoke about the barley, which was just an omer, a sheaf of barley. It was not processed, it was not improved, it was not elevated, it was not baked into barley bread or anything similar, just it was brought rough and ready from the field. The Torah now talks 50 days later. It's time now for the beginning of the wheat harvest. And there the Torah says, don't bring wheat as grain, but rather mimoshvosechem tivil lechem tenufa. Bring bread. And the Torah goes on to say, soles tihiene, it should be fine flour. Chametz teafena, bake it in a chametz form. That's interesting. We don't find chametz offered in the Beis Hamikdash very often. All of the offerings that we find are matzah, that is to say, unleavened. The korban toda was three types of unleavened bread and one type of chametz. That's the one instance that we find chametz. This is the other instance where we find lechem chametz. It says explicitly, chametz teafena, bikurim lashem, a first offering to God. So Abarbanel wonders, why does the Torah say mimosh vosechem? This word is apparently gratuitous, superfluous in Pasuk Yuzayim, from your habitations shall you bring. So Rashi is also alert to that seemingly superfluous word. And Rashi says, V'lo michutz ha'la'aretz, bring it from the land, from your habitation, and not from chutz ha'aretz, not from chutz la'aretz. Okay, the Torah says that mimashosichem, and Rashi is not michutz la'aretz. It says Abarbanel. It's not convincing. Why does the Torah need to say it shouldn't be from chutz la'aretz? All of these offerings, all of these agricultural mitzvot, bikurim, and all of them are specifically for the land of Israel. Besides which, in the passage that we began with, the Torah says, Ki savou el haaretz, when you arrive in the land, when you enter the land. So why does the Torah need to say later on, Mimoshvosechem? It is evident that this is a mitzvah that is applicable when you enter the land of Israel. That's the first question, Abarbanel, or one of the questions that he asked. He also asks that what is the significance of this counting, of counting the 50 days? The Torah could simply say on a particular day, which is the 16th of Nisan, you bring the barley offering, and then on another day on the calendar, or even 50 days later, without saying, Sfartem lachem, count them day by day, 7 weeks, which of course is the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, which we are familiar with. And what is the connection here with the mitzvah of the first fruit regarding the grain harvest? I say fruit, but it's referring here to the yield of the field, the grain, the wheat harvest, which is the most important yield of all, because wheat was the basis of nutrition for in antiquity, in the Middle East, and in many parts of the world, even to this very day. So that was the most important of all. And what's the significance? What's the connection between that and Pesach and Yetzias Mitzrayim? And it is evident that there is a connection because the Torah specifies, count the days. The Torah could have simply said there is a festival or a mitzvah, even without the festival, there's a mitzvah of the first yield of the barley. There's a mitzvah to bring the first yield of the wheat. Later on, there's a mitzvah to bring the bikurim for the olives and for the grapes and for the dates, etc. Then we have at Sukkot's time the mitzvah of the late harvest festival. And the Torah does describe these events in terms of the agricultural cycle. But here the Torah says the offering of the bread from the wheat should be 50 days later, and you've got to count the days one by one. There's evidently some connection here, some connection between the barley and the wheat. What is the Torah intending to convey with this? So Abarbanel mentions an idea which I want to share right now. He does not add, which I would like to add, the concept of the 49 levels of impurity, the 49 sha'arei tuma to which the Jewish people had sunk during their time of subjugation in Egypt, in which they were, let's say, politically subjugated. They were economically exploited, we might say today, but they were also morally depraved and morally deprived. They were not able to retain, or they were unable, perhaps we should say, to retain their spiritual grandeur from Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and for the from the Yosef and his brothers who came to Mitzrayim. As the years went by, the generations went by, the subjugation became acute, and the moral stature of the Jewish people sank to a level of depravity that was not much different than the Egyptians. I'm elaborating slightly, but this is essentially what Abarbanel says, such that when they left Mitzrayim, they were at a very repressed level spiritually, to the point that their status was embodied or symbolized by the barley. Barley is a food which can be enjoyed by people, but it's more often animal fodder. It's more usually cultivated for the purpose of feeding to livestock. Moreover, it is not, in the case of the mitzvah of the Torah, it is not improved or enhanced or elevated. It's just brought rough and ready from the field. Says Abravanel, the reason the Torah says count 50 days is that it symbolizes the incremental ascent from this lowest level of depravity ultimately towards the ability to receive the Torah 50 days later. And that is exemplified by the wheat harvest. Wheat, which is a farmer does not feed wheat to his livestock. Wheat is more costly and it's more easily digested by a person, and therefore, and it's more has greater nutritional value. I mean, it has gluten in it, which I'm not getting into the biochemistry, which I don't especially understand. But wheat is a more popular and a more prized grain, more so than barley. And therefore, the Torah says that the wheat should be brought in an elevated form, in the form of bread, even chametz. Chametz takes more time, takes more effort, takes more longer to bake, takes more fuel. Chametz symbolizes a more luxurious, a more luxury type of food. Pesach time, of course, it's lechem oni. It reminds us of the servitude in which the Jewish people were, even though the main reason for the matzah is because we were rushed out of Mitzrayim, but it also says halachma anya. This is the bread of affliction which we ate in Mitzrayim. So the chametz symbolizes achievement, ascent. It symbolizes the transformation from the animalistic level of the barley, and that's why the Torah says, Abravanel, the Torah says count 50 days. Abravanel says it's like a person who is anticipating something and he's counting the days. He doesn't explain why, according to that, which the other Meforshim do ask, and Sefer Chinuch asks, why don't we count down if a person is anticipating an important, much coveted event to occur on a certain day, so he marks the days in his calendar, how many days have elapsed, so he counts the days down, how many, not so much how many days have elapsed, rather, but how many days until that event. So Bravanel doesn't explain it, but according to what he says, I would suggest that the meaning is that the Jewish people were uh, like aspiring to when they reached the level that they were able to eat the bread, again, in the symbolic form. So that's where we count up, because we need to like mark the transition and the progression from the level of the escaped fugitive slaves till we are able to like achieve and manifest our full humanity. Brahman has a nice turn of phrase. He says, Uvechag HaShavuos shekiblu Torah, on the festival of Shavuos, when they received the Torah, v'nasu ba'alei seichel umevine mada, and they became those who have wisdom and intellect. Tziva shakrivu mincha chadasha, they were instructed, they were commanded to bring a new offering. Shahaya behem az ruach chadasha, because the Jewish people were renewed. The Jewish people were given an additional a facet of their character, or better yet, of their souls, and they were machal bnei adam chachamim unevonim. That's how Abarbanel explains it. What I like very much is his explanation of Mimo Shvo Seichem. Very clever. I don't know if it's exactly the pshat, but perhaps it is. And for those who paid attention, that was the source, or that's the derivation of our title for the shir tonight, from the field or from the kitchen. He says, Mimo Shvo Seichem, it means from your habitation. The barley was just from the field. You take a scythe and you cut it and you bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, and that is the mitzvah of the barley. But 50 days later, when we bring the wheat and the wheat is baked into bread, that's from the kitchen. That's from the threshing floor. That is from the mill. That is from the kneading trough. That is from the oven. That requires a lot more intervention, human effort. It's not just what you find growing. Okay, it could grow wild, or maybe it's been planted. Probably it has been planted, but it's not just what grows immediately from the field, but rather it's that which has been improved. That's why it's mimo shvo sichem, from your habitation. That's the symbolism of habitation. Very clever idea. I feel. I was just, in kind of seeking to illustrate this idea. Most food, I'm talking about agricultural products, are better when they have been improved upon, when they've been enhanced in some way. I was thinking about a few that are exceptions to that. There are certain fruits or vegetables that come to my mind, which I think are probably more frequently enjoyed fresh than once they've been processed. But those are the exceptions. Like a banana, I think a banana is best when it's fresh. Blueberries, I love blueberries, and okay, you can cook them, etc. I think they're better when they're fresh. Also, strawberries are great. Fresh strawberries, if they've been checked for insects, fantastic. I don't think they can be improved upon, in my personal opinion. But most things that you can think of definitely can be improved upon. Wheat, barley, most things are, I mean, a potato, okay, carrot you can eat fresh as well. Okay, I do eat carrots, maybe we can add that to the list. But most things that we think of, once they are improved, whether they're roasted or sauteed or enhanced or improved or made into a recipe or something like that, they're better when they're processed. That's why the barley is an exception, meaning it's brought in a form which is not especially elevated. And on the contrary, like we said, it's really food for the livestock. The wheat has been elevated into bread, and it's at that point that we bring it for Shavuos, symbolizing when the Jewish people receive the Torah. Now, Abravanel doesn't really elaborate on why the Torah doesn't say that this is the Chag that celebrates Matan Torah. He does refer to it. The reason he gives, I don't find that convincing, so I want to tell you a reason that I saw in the Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar, the Kli Yakar quotes Abravanel not infrequently, but this idea is not from Abravanel, it's from Kli Yakar. Just very briefly, he says that the Torah doesn't emphasize that Shavuos is a Chag that is celebrated 50 days after Pesach because that's when we receive the Torah. Even though when we read the account of the giving of the Torah, it is evident that that was the day, but the Torah doesn't emphasize it. Says Kli Yakar, because the Torah doesn't want a person to think that we find the different mo'adim of the year are associated with certain mitzvahs, which are specific to those days of the year. On Pesach, we left Mitzrayim, we ate matzah at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and so we do year by year. Or on Rosh Hashanah, which we're going to talk about shortly, we blow the shofar. We don't have a mitzvah of blowing shofar other weeks of the year. On Sukkot, we recall the fact that for the time of our sojourn in the wilderness, we dwelt in Sukkot, and therefore on the festival of Sukkot, for 7 days, we dwell in a booth, and we recall the fact that at that time, formative juncture in Jewish history, we were protected by the Ananei HaKavod, or the different opinions that I mentioned. If the Torah were to say on Shavuos you receive the Torah, then we might imagine that on Shavuos we study Torah because that's the day when we receive the Torah, and we don't do it the other days of the year. Matzah we eat only on Pesach. If you eat matzah other times of the year, you can take it or leave it. And the same is true for shofar, which we blow on Rosh Hashanah and not other days of the year. I suppose you could say Yom Kippur, we fast. A person can fast on most days of the year. Certain days we're not allowed to fast. Most of the days you can fast. But there's no mitzvah min haTorah to fast except on Yom Kippur. But Torah is a mitzvah every day of the year. Perhaps Tisha B'Av is an exception. So, in order to avoid the pitfall of promoting the notion that we celebrate receiving the Torah and therefore we study the Torah on Shavuos, the Torah obscures the fact that this is the day of Matan Torah. That's the suggestion that Kleakar advances. I just wanted to add that as a kind of footnote to what Abarbanel teaches us. In the time we have left, I want to tell you what our friend Don Isaac Abravanel has to say about Rosh Hashanah. Now, it's very interesting that Rosh Hashanah is not identified in the Torah as the Day of Judgment. The Torah says, if we turn further to Pasuk Chaf Dalin, so it's in the Art Scroll, it's on page 686, it's chapter 23, verse 23, 24. In verse 24, in particular, in the seventh month, on the first of the month, it should be a Sabbath, a type of Sabbath, Zichron Trua, a day that recalls the sounding of the shofar. The word Trua is the sound generated by a shofar, or it could be by a trumpet as well. Mikra Kodesh, and then the Torah goes on to say, but on the 10th, there's more about it. What is the significance of this day? The Torah doesn't really provide much elaboration. So Abravanel says the following, that the significance of Rosh Hashanah can be understood, must be understood in terms of its companion event, which is Yom Kippur. And that, of course, is the immediate following paragraph. And the Torah describes quite a lot about Yom Kippur, but previously we have a lot more about Yom Kippur anyway. In fact, Abarbanel says that Pesach, we mentioned already, is described extensively in Parashas Bo. The festivals generally are mentioned at the end of Mishpatim, they're mentioned in Kisisa. However, that's only the regalim. We find Yom Kippur described in detail in last week's Sedra, Achrei Mos, but Rosh Hashanah is not mentioned anywhere until now. And even here, the Torah doesn't tell us that much about it. In particular, the Torah doesn't say explicitly, this is the Day of Judgment. The Torah implies that 10 days later is a kind of Day of Judgment in which we have the gift of the expiation or the atonement for our transgressions. But explicit teaching that on Rosh Hashanah we are judged, and then on Yom Kippur we are forgiven, which is the subject of so many famous Talmudic sayings, which we know about the three books, for example, and that sort of thing. We find that the Torah does not reveal that. Says Abravanel, in the minutes we have left, I want to share with you a beautiful idea. Says Abarbanel that the Torah begins by saying, on the first day of the seventh month. The seventh month is counted from Nisan, because the Torah told us previously that Nisan is the first of the months. So in Parshas Bo, Abravanel has an extended essay about the year. When does the year begin? Does the year begin in Nisan? Does the year begin in Tishrei? And he explained there that for the Jewish people, the year begins really in Nisan. However, Tishrei is when the year begins in terms of the astronomy. Abravanel maintains that the natural time for the judgment, for the foreshadowing, or for the not just the forecast, but for the predestiny of the year ahead, is at Tishrei. Tishrei is when the world was created, according to Rabbi Eliezer, And Tishrei is associated with the constellation of the scales, which represents judgment. And Tishrei, therefore, in astronomical terms, in naturalistic terms, is when the year begins. And therefore, the determination of how the year will unfold is determined on that day. Now, of course, we know in actuality, events unfold all the time. And you can have a project that does not begin well, and then it picks up pace along the way. It could happen. On the other hand, a project that begins well, of course, there's no guarantee it will continue that way, but it's much more promising. A person is much more optimistic. If he, launches a product and the launch is limp and the uptake is poor, okay, lahavdi just occurs to me like when you launch a film, and movies take many months and sometimes tens of millions of dollars, sometimes more than that, even to produce. The opening weekend is a very strong indicator. Occasionally, it may pick up over time, but all of the investors, etc., they want to see what is the receipt, what is the sort of success in the opening weekend, because that is a very strong indicator for the coming weeks and months and even years, the success of that film. Abravanel doesn't mention films, obviously, as an analogy, but he says that according to Ma'areches Hashamayim, according to the stars and the constellations, so Tishrei is the determination of how the year will unfold for the whole world, but not for the Jewish people. The Jewish people are uh, not subject to the natural order if they are worthy. If we are worthy, then we're not dependent on the stars and the constellations, but rather we have the benefit of the divine attention, and Hashem has given us a great gift. The gift He's given us is the knowledge that Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. On Rosh Hashanah, we say it's a day of judgment. Chol ba'ei olam, for all who come into the world and for the world itself. Yom Kippur, we don't say that. We don't say on Yom Kippur that it's a day of judgment for the whole world. Yom Kippur is only for the Jewish people. Yom Kippur is a gift that is given to the Jewish people. So that's why he says the Torah doesn't emphasize that Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment, because the Torah does not want a Jewish person to think that we Jews are reliant on the constellations and the determination of the future of the year that is sort of written in the stars is our destiny as well. It's not the case. Says Abarbanel, this is why the Torah says that you should blow the shofar, Yom Zichron Trua, because the shofar has the like um, impact of arousing a person's awareness to awaken him to the recognition that he has 10 days to get his house in order. He has 10 days to prepare for Yom Kippur when, if he's deserving, Hashem will forgive his indiscretions or even his transgressions, and Hashem will write him in the book of life for a year of success ahead. He says that Rosh Hashanah is the companion to Yom Kippur, and it is the prelude to Yom Kippur. But the Torah doesn't reveal that explicitly. In other words, the Torah doesn't emphasize that Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment because it's the day of judgment only in the naturalistic sense, but it is our destiny and it is our capacity to rise above the prescription or the prognostication of the stars and to, so to speak, harness or cultivate our relationship with Hashem Himself, who will determine our destiny, which is above the natural order. In the couple of minutes we have left, I want to share with you what Abravanel says about the shofar. He says the shofar symbolizes the freedom, and he'll review, we'll just get to it very shortly, the ways in which the shofar symbolizes freedom. Shofar is prescribed. I said we don't do it every day of the year. We only do it on Rosh Hashanah, 2 days. But in ancient times, they would also blow the shofar, besides in times of war, etc. They would blow the shofar in times of fast days. They would also blow the shofar on the Yovel. The Torah prescribes that, as we know. It's going to be in next week's Parsha. Yovel is ukrasim dror l'chol yoshvecha. proclaim liberty throughout the land and and freedom for all of its inhabitants. The shofar is a symbol. It announces the freedom of the slaves, and we are no longer subservient, or we're not subservient to the stars of the heaven, to the constellations, but rather we are only subject to the master of the universe himself. So he says this is the primary significance of the Shabbat. That's why the Torah says when that day comes, which people who are aware of the rhythm of nature realize that that's the beginning of the new year. But for Jewish people, that's the time when we sound the shofar, reminding us that we're not dependent on the constellations. Tkiyah shofar, he says, is a cure, is an antidote to the dependence on the constellations. And he goes on to say, and we'll do it only very briefly, that there are 7 reasons. Now, this is a bit similar to the famous 10 symbolisms of the shofar of Sadia Gaon. He doesn't quote Sadia Gaon. I think he had it on his own. I'm not sure if he was aware of the tradition of Sadia Gaon. I don't know whether he was or not. But he shows how each of these 7 represent our freedom and our like transcending the prescription and the determination of the constellations. He says the first one is Shetorah al Durar v'chavshit, on the freedom and on the liberty, to say we're not concerned about the influence and the determination of the constellations. We're b'nei chorim. We're free from that. The second is Tkiyah shofar, refers to the coronation of the king. We say that Hashem is the king, therefore we don't we're not dependent upon, or we're not subject to the prescription or the influence of the stars, as we keep saying. Um, the third thing he says is to inspire a person to tshuva. And when he does tshuva, when he suppresses the Yetzer Hara, so then again he will be able to merit the forgiveness on Yom Kippur. The shofar represents the, like as it says, when the shofar sounds in the city, will the people not be afraid? It kind of agitates or intimidates or terrifies the Yetzer Hara, and in that sense, a person is able to achieve the teshuvah, which will bring him the kapara on Yom Kippur. The fourth reason is to recall Akedas Yitzchak, because Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, he says was. I'm not quite sure about that one. He does say, I don't see exactly how it fits into the rest of his scheme. The fifth one he mentions is to remember the day of Matan Torah, because there was a shofar chazak ma'od at the giving of the Torah. And of course, we became free, like it says, Charus al haluchos, al tikra charus al cherus. So again, we were cleansed from the impurity of Mitzrayim, even at a deeper level, even the impurity of the Nachash Kadmon. And in that sense, again, we are cleansed and we are freed with the Am Segula. And again, it's just our relation with Hashem in which we've entered the covenant. The sixth reason is to recall Kivutz Galius, the ingathering of the exiles. It says, Vayom ha'i takab shofar gadol, uval ha'ovdim be'eretz Ashur. On that day, the great shofar will be sounded, and it says, V'haisa la'adonai hamlucha, that at that time Hashem will be king over all the world, and the kingship will be God's. To the extent that we recognize that, again, we are free from the determination of the constellations. And finally, the seventh one is to recall the resurrection of the dead, the quickening of the dead. That will be a completely supernatural event, again symbolizing the fact that Hashem is in control of the world, even of the natural order itself. These are the 7 reasons which he says, 7 precious reasons for sounding the shofar, and they all represent our relationship with Hashem and how we are elevated beyond and above the prescription that is determined by the constellations. And in this way, we can understand why Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not only closely proximate in the calendar, but actually represent a kind of companions, in which Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment for the whole world, and Yom Kippur is when we, the Jewish people, are able to draw upon the relationship which we have with Hashem, in which through which we're not dependent on the determination of the stars. Of course, this reflects Abravanel's, I suppose, medieval conception of human free will and determination of the stars, which is the subject of a much wider discussion, which definitely we will have to save for another time. It's not for tonight. So thank you again, and I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos.